Please be seated. Louis was a swap.
Good morning once again. The floor is back to the Office of the Prosecutor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Your Honours. Again, Mr. Witness, I'll resume where I left off just before the break. We were just discussing the students who were deployed to the Carrefour Texaco, and you told us, and let me just check, you told us that there was a deputy commander at the École de Gendarmerie that was in charge of the daily activities of the École de Gendarmerie. Would you give us his name, please?
Mon agent à l'école était le lieutenant.
He was Lieutenant Colonel Ayim, Iyemmou.
How many students were deployed to the Carrefour du Texaco?
Généralement, c'est
Answer: generally speaking, it is a platoon that is deployed, that is between 20 and 25 men. Now, if we do not have that availability, then we might deploy 15 men. It's in that area.
Who led the men on the ground?
il y a toujours soit un
Answer: there was always either a subordinate officer, either a high-ranking non-commissioned officer who was out in the field with the men. But it's generally speaking, it is because generally speaking, we don't have enough of such officers. So sometimes it is a subordinate officer of a lieutenant or second lieutenant, or otherwise a warrant officer that is a senior ranking non-commissioned officer, or a senior officer.
And these men, were they armed on that day, 16 December?
oui, ils étaient
Answer: yes, they were armed. They had some weapons. I would specify that we did not have enough weapons. Really, there was very much lacking in terms of weapons. So if there was a platoon moving around, that is to say the equivalent of 20 to 25 men, what they had in terms of weapons would not be any more than 5 weapons. And in particular, the École de Gendarmerie, the priority in terms of weaponry, the AK weapons, these were normally given over to the intervention units. At the École de Gendarmerie, we had about 20 FSA rifles or MAS 36 rifles. Maître Bougnon, Mr. President.
Maître Bougnon?
Désolé, confrère.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt my learned colleague, but I'm hoping this is going to start working. But since the break, the French transcript has not been up and running.
Well, can I please? Yes, please. The court office is taking care of this.
I understand it's working now.
You might understand this, I don't. Is it working?
Maître Bougnon. Yes, Mr. President, we have the transcript of what has just been said, but we didn't have what was said before. I don't know whether this will be fixed later on, but we have now what has just been said a moment ago.
Time is working. This moment. Okay. So you don't have it from the beginning of the hearing, the first 5 minutes. Okay, but this is recorded and it will be for sure integrated. Okay, so we can continue. Madam Prosecutor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned weapons. You said they were armed. You mentioned FSA rifles. Is that what these men were armed with?
Généralement,
Answer. Generally speaking, this is what is given to the students because these are the weapons that we have at the École de Gendarmerie. There are very few AK-47s at the École de Gendarmerie.
Did you receive a report of what these men, these students, what they did at the Carrefour Texaco?
certainement, mais comme il y a eu
Answer. Certainly, but as it's a long time ago, I can't remember specifically today, but yes, certainly I was reported back to.
Reported to you? Which person?
je ne peux plus savoir qui
Answer. I am no longer in a position to know who was the chief of detachment. So generally speaking, when it's like this, it's Lieutenant Colonel Aimu would tell me that the men have come home, there's nothing to report, all of the equipment is there are no wounded men, there are no absent men, they've all come back. That's the type of report that would be made to me for that type of mission.
On this day, in relation to this particular mission and the particular report that you received, did you receive a report of any injuries to any persons?
est blessé de quel côté.
Answer. Wounded on which side?
Any reports of injuries at this location, Carrefour Texaco. We're talking about the Carrefour Texaco. Did you receive, when the officer reported back to you, did you receive a report of any injuries to anyone on any side, any civilian, any FDS, anyone at all?
Je n'ai pas souvenir.
Answer. I do not have any recollection of having been spoken to of wounded individuals at that location.
Anyone died at that location?
Je n'ai pas le souvenir.
Answer. I have no recollection of having been told of any deaths at that location.
Okay, and we talked about the Carrefour de la Vie earlier, specifically that location. Let me just ask you in relation to that location, when you received your report from Robert in relation to that location, were you informed of any injuries or deaths to any person? Any person?
J'ai déjà répondu à
Answer. I've already answered that question, saying that when the chief of detachment returned, he did not speak to me of any wounded, of any dead. He told to me He talked to me about the body of men that had returned and the equipment that had returned.
Now, on the 16th December, who was in charge at the SECOS HQ?
Je voulais préciser que
Answer. I wanted to specify that there was no person who was responsible at the SECOS HQ specifically. There are installations there that we have guarded by a small detachment of 4 or 5 or 6 men who guard the entrance and the exit and ensure the security for those individuals working at that HQ. That is to say, people who are in charge of the radio network, those who take care of emergency calls for intervention, and who guide the detachments, the intervention detachments on a daily basis within the SECOS. So there is no permanent presence at the SECOS unless it is a working day.
On the 16th December, just be specific, please. On the 16th December, was there anyone in charge there at the SECOS HQ?
responsable dans quel
Answer. In charge, what do you mean? Was it a duty officer? We do not have any officer in charge. If it is somebody who is on duty, because there are duty shifts, then we indicate the duty for each sector, because each sector has detached an officer for duty. And after working 24 hours, he is relieved by another officer, and that's what we do in our HQ. And this duty unit has a detachment, a small detachment of 4 or 5 men that ensure the security or provide security at our HQ. Are there any other specifics that you want me to give you associated with this issue? I don't know.
Commanding officer of SECOS operations on the 16th December.
Alors, au risque de me
Answer. At the risk of repeating myself, the SECOS did not have a particular operation on the 16th of December. This is the second or third time that I am repeating myself, Madam Prosecutor. The operations of the 16th of December were under the Director General of the National Police. And it was under each major command to put at his disposal detachments.
All right. Who was in charge of protecting, let's be more specific, protecting the Cocody HQ for SECOS on the 16th December?
Je n'ai plus cette information.
Answer. I no longer have recollection of that information, ma'am.
C'est des détails qu'un juge.
Because these are details that a general cannot keep in his mind 8 years after the fact.
Now, you, in that case, where were you based on the 16th December?
À l'école de gendarmerie d'Abidjan.
Answer. At the École de Gendarmerie in Abidjan.
How were you communicating with your elements, these SECOS elements that we know were deployed on the 16th December?
Je ne communiquais pas avec les.
I was not communicating with the SECOS elements because it was not up to me to communicate with them in view of the unified or joint command principle.
I know why you insist on this, or you have to confront him with something. Otherwise, we are always turning around the same argument.
Okay. Were you following the operations on the... we talked about radios yesterday or the day before. Were you following the operations on 16 December on the radio?
Oui, comme tout le monde.
Answer, yes, like everybody else. I was following, but I didn't have the radio stuck to my ear. But I wasn't following on a permanent basis. It was with the aide de camp, the radio, and if there was something important, he'd tell me about it, but I didn't have it on my ear all the time. I had my telephone and I was waiting for the SEMA or the senior commander to call me over the phone. As I said yesterday, generally speaking, we would communicate over the telephone.
You told us about a synthesis meeting. You told us about a debrief meeting that you had on the 16th December. I'd like to ask you about that. Where did that take place?
À l'état-major.
Answer, at the army staff headquarters.
About what time?
Probablement l'après-midi.
Answer, it was probably in the afternoon, at the end of the afternoon.
Who attended?
Au risque de me répéter.
Answer, at the risk of repeating myself, it was the same generals with their respective staff.
Now, you told us earlier about the DGPN reporting at this meeting. So what did he report?
Il a fait le...
Answer, he gave us an overview of the day's operation. An exhaustive report of the operation that had unfolded on the day. According to the locations, he gave us a list of various incidents that had occurred according to the various locations, the various communes, the various neighborhoods, and he gave us a report as to the number of people who had been killed within law enforcement. There were approximately 6 or 7 deaths recorded. Some were killed in their troop transportations vehicles, killed with anti-tanks rockets, and they were completely burnt alive, and some in their vehicles in Abobo. And he also talked about civilian deaths. He mentioned the fact that with regard to civilian deaths, we had to be very careful, because the individuals that we deem to be civilians are, generally speaking, armed. There are no distinctive signs, but they are armed, according to the information that he had got back from people on the ground. So that was the report that the DGPN gave at the meeting.
How many civilian casualties did he report at this meeting?
Il en a...
Answer, he spoke about them. He said there were some in Cocody, in Dje Bi, in Kumasi. As to the number, well, it might vary, but yes, he really dwelled on that because it struck us. The death of our men at by APG-7s with very heavy weaponry. So you really need to understand the danger that was present on that day.
I just want to make sure I have the translation correctly here. You say he dwelled on the numbers, the number of civilian casualties? He gave you a number, did he? Of civilian casualties?
Pas de façon...
Answer. Well, not specifically, but he did talk about the various locations where his men had reported back to him that they had discovered civilian victims. I spoke of Cocody, the Enna Carrefour, and I also talked about Abobo. I talked about neighborhoods such as Ajame, Kumasi, and so on and so forth. But today, how many? Well, 10 or 15, 7 or 8, I'm not in a position to say. But our men who were killed on that very day were very much struck by the situation, because many of them had died with weapons, and there were RPG-7 anti-tank weapons that were used and that completely burnt the troop transportation vehicles.
Maître Zokou was on his feet first. So. Maître Zokou?
Prt3.
Maître Zokou. Maître Altit, please go ahead.
Frère.
Maître Altit, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your indulgence, my learned colleague. I don't know what you were going to say.
Back for the age. So, for you, it's not a good sign.
Monsieur le Président, je crains que vous n'ayez raison.
Maître Altit, I fear that you are right, Mr. President. My intervention was, well, allow me, because in the meantime, the transcript is moving forward. So let me come back a little bit somewhat. I think it's around here somewhere. There we are, Mr. President. Dwelled on things, because this struck us. He dwelled on the death of our men at the hands of extremely heavy weaponry. It's very clear. And then I think there's a little problem with the interpretation. That's why I got to my feet. My learned colleague gets to her feet and says, and specifies in a question, you say, turning towards the witness, she says that he did the contrary to what the witness said.
Defend the learned colleague, as you say, because here we are using this terminology, because in English it was like this. So it was not a matter of, it was a matter of translation, probably.
Yeah, I suspected it might be wrong, which is why I specifically went back to it, in fact. Yeah.
So probably there is an issue, a translation issue. So.
Is that it for the intervention?
It was the same intervention of Maître Zokou. Okay, thank you.
Maître Zokou, entirely.
So the floor is back to the Office of the Prosecutor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, we were talking about civilian casualties. Do you mean you talked about a broad range of numbers, 8, 10, 15. Were these deaths or injuries?
Ça peut être...
Answer. Well, it could be deaths, or it could be deaths and injuries. But this is not exhaustive in nature, because the DGPN gave us those figures. But I don't have that specifically in mind. I'm giving you a ballpark figure.
Okay. Now, so far as you mentioned earlier, you said there was something about the DGPN talking about civilian casualties being armed. What did he say? Did he say all civilians who were casualties were armed, or what did please just clarify what he said specifically?
En fait, ce qu'il voulait
Answer. Well, what he wanted to say was that this was a march during which there were a number of individuals who were like the ordinary marchers, but they were armed, so they were firing upon the law enforcement officers, who were not only armed, but they had weapons that really shouldn't have been there. You know, the RPG-7s. These are anti-tank weapons.
They were armed persons.
look at toutes les
Answer. Well, all of the main locations where the march was unfolding, there were always armed individuals in the crowd of marchers. That's what he said. There were always armed individuals in the crowd of marchers, namely in Abobo.
The police were going to investigate the civilian casualties that he reported to you?
il ne nous a pas donné.
He did not give us that information.
Are you aware of any investigation by the police into the civilian casualties?
Pourquoi pas aussi sur les victimes militaires?
Why not also about the military victims? Because 6 policemen were killed on that day. So they have to begin with investigations about their own elements. Some of them were killed in their vehicles with RPG-7 weapons. I believe if he had to carry out an investigation, he would have to begin with the massacre of his own men. In any case, he did not mention that. I insist on that. There were 7 policemen killed, and some of them were killed with anti-tank rockets, RPG-7s, during a match, not during a conflict, during a match.
Well, I'm going to insist on this, please, that you answer my question. And my question related to the investigation by the police of civilian casualties. That's my question. Are you aware of any investigation by the police into civilian casualties?
Civilian meaning not FDS.
Yes, I think the witness...
No, just for the record.
Thank you.
Been an investigation, but I am not aware of the findings of such an investigation.
On any side, you mean?
De quelque côté que ce soit, monsieur.
Yes, on any side.
Now, just to deal with this, you mentioned use of RPG-7s. Where? Where were you told they were used, these weapons?
Abobo.
Abobo.
Now, I would like to ask you to look at a document, please. 00450994. The OTP prefix. Should go back on evidence 1 if it was on the other channel for my learned friend. Item 152 for my learned friends on the list of material. To the Minister of Interior, referencing a communication of the 26th of January. 7, in fact, please. take your time to look at this, please. If we could scroll down and then go over to the signatory. And before I take you to specific paragraphs, the last page, 0998, we could just look at that. Stated to be from the chef du district, Adomo Bonaventure. That's the 4th district, Djamé. Is that right?
Ben, je sais pas.
I do not know. I do not know.
And does the Sekos sector, Djamé, where was that based?
Au district,
Police District 2 in Djamé, and